Hello sisters. This is a very impromptu video, but I think it is something very related to what I shared earlier. I shared a post about the story that we are telling ourselves on a regular basis inside our heads, and sometimes out loud too. So I wanted to chime in here and speak a little bit to it. I have been working, I remember a few years ago when I had been working very deeply with Kuan Yin, because I wanted to build compassion towards some of my stories, some of the stories that were bothering me and were kind of repeating in my life time after time after time, and showing up in different people. So she told me to lighten up about the stories that have caused me hurt. Now, that didn't settle very well with me at first. I did not like the idea, and I didn't know how to not feel hurt. Yeah, that was the very reason I was working with the Kuan Yin archetype. But then, I attempted. I am a good teacher and I am a very good student. So I started playing different narratives about my story. And here is the thing that I want to share. Being hurt emotionally is a fact for many people because pain is part of human existence. However, becoming a victim as a result of this wounding is kind of is then a framing of that fact. In a way, it is about glorifying the fact that we had that painful story in our life. Because I've noticed that at times we can take our pain and create a really exotic story of suffering and victimhood. We can do it unconsciously, we can do it consciously. And I know, some of you may be going through some really deep traumatic stories, trying to overcome and all of that, and so what I may share may trigger you, but I want to bring you a new perspective. So keep your heart open and listen if it resonates with you or not, because if you are interested in moving on, embracing a new way of being, then this is very important. For women, for us women, we have a deep-seated desire to be seen, to be loved, and to be accepted. And oftentimes in order to experience all of this, we go into the energy of, again, the beggar energy or the pity energy, and we constantly keep repeating our stories to relate ourselves to others. And what I have noticed in personal development movement, it is consumed with people who spend all their energy exploring themselves and their issues, but also honing their stories again and again and again. So every time you meet, you repeat your stories again and again, rather than breaking out of that cycle. So this is the thing. Let me know if this resonates, okay? First of all, let me know if this resonates with you. Sometimes when you hear a person, you meet a person, and you always know that, okay, this is the story of this person because they have mentioned it to you so many times. It wasn't really necessary to mention so many times, because if they mention once, that's just enough. But then, this becomes a habit to keep reminding others and ourselves and mentioning it in our conversation. And I'm sometimes very taken aback when we meet in circle and listen to the ways when women introduce themselves. For example, there was a gathering, not really a circle, but a gathering, and I met this lady, and she introduced herself to me. and she said like, hey, this is my name. I almost didn't come here tonight for this gathering because I suffer from really low self-esteem. And I was like, okay, thanks for introducing yourself and throwing your story right on my face, which was not really required, but it's okay. This is how you present yourself. And so it's quite startling to see how many of us actually even introduce ourselves related to our stories of lack, less than, hurt, trauma, and unfortunately there are also instances where I've noticed that we compete to see who has a heavier story, who has suffered more, who has more pain, who has gone through more, who has a better excuse for not being the first to say I'm sorry. Oftentimes so I'm making fun of this, and I'm speaking about this really dense topic in a light-hearted way, because for once I invite you to take it a bit easy and notice the patterns of your stories. If this is how you introduce yourself to people, they don't need to know this. Of course, it is all right when you mention about your story in a context, because why not? But then if this becomes your way of being, guess what? You remain stuck in that beautifully created stories, so we are often at times consciously or unconsciously claiming that our stories prove that we deserve pity, or we do that to deserve pity, or sometimes special accommodations, or even a sense of relief from self-responsibility. This is what I notice when a woman constantly brings up her story, the same story, and this is what is important, the same story. When she constantly brings up her same story, what I feel is this, that either she wants some kind of empathy from me about that, or she wants me to treat her in a special way, or she is just not ready to take self-responsibility. Now, in saying so, I might have offended somebody, but listen, I have gone through pain as well. In fact, when my father passed away when I was in my early 20s, and I was going through that depression phase, I didn't understand, or I didn't know, I was too young to understand how to deal with this big loss or grief. And I remember reading this quote in the Dalai Lama's book, The Art of Happiness, that the loss of a person in your life can be the biggest gift. And it hurt me so much. I didn't want a gift, I wanted my father. So it took me years to understand. So I understand that it is important to validate our pain. Validating our pain can help us discover our strengths and help us learn valuable lessons. But when we start colluding, kind of creating that mixture, colluding in the nightmare of being so wounded that we can't recover, we become emotionally, mentally, and spiritually crippled in a way. Once again, what we do is we then buy into our own powerlessness. We become paralyzed in stepping into our own life's big picture, our own big desires. So if you are feeling really confused about what I'm sharing, let me know if this makes sense. Let me know if you have caught yourself that you often speak out your story without being asked. It's a good thing. Give people a chance to ask. And I know that, I always come up as this quiet person, smiling and happy, with grace. So people often think that, okay, she didn't have to deal with a lot. She looks all sorted. No, I have done a lot of work on myself. I've spent years crying buckets trying to understand the aspects of my emotional baggage, but I choose to not vomit that on people. Yeah. So one of the ways to think is about stories is think about what story is bothering you right now. Yeah. What's the story that you have been telling yourself? Is it something that you are telling yourself that you are suffering from, or a present situation which is very heavy, and this is a repeated pattern in your life? Yeah. So I know this may sound harsh, but the loving truth is this, that the real problem is that you are confusing your story as your reality. Your story is not your current reality. Your narrative is a nightmare or a suffering that you cannot escape as long as you hang on to it. You cannot overcome or move beyond your story as long as you hold on to it really tightly. And then oftentimes what happens is the more we repeat those stories, it kind of becomes like our personal mythology or our personal legends, because we can add so many nuances to it. So you may tell me this, but that's the fact. Yeah, that's a fact that this happens to me, and this is my story, and it is all true. Yeah, that's a fact. I'm not making excuses. These facts are real, and that is true. That is true. These facts are real, very real. However, let's not confuse the past with the present and the future. The story that you experienced was your reality in the past, not your present and not your future, unless you just hold on to it and then allow it to keep repeating through different circumstances, different people in your life. Your facts of the past are simply beliefs rooted in your memories. Yeah. So you see, this is why I say that your stories can be your greatest gift or your worst nightmare. Because your brain does not distinguish what's happening in the present moment and what you are experiencing as storytelling inside of your head about your past. So think about it. It doesn't matter if you're really experiencing it in the real time or if you're thinking about it in your head out loud in your mind's eye. So the brain cannot differentiate. And here is why it becomes your worst nightmare, the repeated use of your story. Here is why it becomes your worst nightmare. Because neuroscientists have already discovered on a synaptic level means, a little bit of biology here, synaptic level means it consists of your central nervous system. Yeah, your central nervous system. So scientists have already discovered that a real and a recalled event both register in your brain as the same way. Both register in your neocortex, which is about sensory perception, information storage, and your limbic system, which is responsible for your behavioral and emotional responses. So basically, a real and a recall event are both registered in these parts of your brain, which is your information parts, the neocortex, the sensory perception, and the limbic part, the limbic system that is responsible for your emotional responses. So it is recorded in the same way, with the same intensity. Think about this, with the same intensity. A lived experience and a recalled experience in our head, which is why the concept of visualization is such a big thing. is so powerful, because the more we are able to learn how to visualize our desired outcome, the more we entrain our subconscious mind to create such experiences. Athletes do that. People going for Olympic do that. You know, people in the sports have been doing this since decades. This is a very big part of their training. They see themselves already receiving the medal or already winning that race, because that's how they can reinforce a new outcome for them. Yeah. So every time you relive an old hurt on a regular basis, every time you speak either out loud or in your mind's eye, you know, inside your head, every time you relive an old hurt on a regular basis, it reinforces your central nervous system. Okay, for example, whenever I retell the story that my teacher in my 3rd grade told me that I was lazy and I would never get to do good things in life because I'm so lazy. Every time I tell this story, this is just an example, every time I tell this story inside my head or to people around, the anguish, the intense emotion that I may feel isn't from the old wounds being reopened. It's from the new pain being created as you re-register that story in your nervous system. So think about this. So when you re-register your old story in your nervous system, and you feel these intense emotions, you know, sometimes you feel like breathlessness or heavy shoulders or pain somewhere in your body. It's not because you're reliving that old moment. It is because you are creating new pain in your nervous system, new levels of pain. So you may think that you are simply venting out, you are simply getting rid of this old shame and anger, but your brain does not know otherwise, unfortunately. So this is why it becomes a nightmare. In other words, the more we repeat our painful stories inside of our heads to ourselves or to people around us on a regular basis, the deeper we kind of create those grooves of pain along the neural pathways. And then guess what? That becomes our dominant vibration. And then guess what? We begin to attract very similar experiences that may help us to remember